Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Many disciples emerged to watch Bai Xiaochun go up to Mount River Defiance. Everyone knew why the other three Middle Reaches sects had come last month, and it left them simmering with rage. They also knew that Bai Xiaochun was going to represent the river-defying sect in a fight inside an arcane pocket realm. When news spread that the only person in the entire sect who qualified to go was Bai Xiaochun, many cultivators started to get worried. The river-defying sect was a newcomer to the Middle Reaches, as unfamiliar with the cultivation world there as they were strangers to it. In these unfamiliar surroundings, the river-defying sect seemed impressive, but the truth was that until they produced a Diva realm expert, they were in a very precarious position, and could be easily supplanted. A feeling of uneasiness and lurking danger existed in the hearts of not only the ordinary disciples, but even the patriarchs. Thankfully, they had the Blood Ancestor and the Dire Skybanyan, as well as the shocking True Spirit, which made even the other three great sects nervous. Those were the only things that gave the river-defying sect a modicum of stability. Bai Xiaochun was aware of all of that. Therefore, despite the fact that he didn't really want to go to the arcane pocket realm, and despite the ferocity he had witnessed among the disciples of the three sects, he had chosen to go along with the arrangement. Gritting his teeth and trembling with fear, he led Bruiser slowly up to the top of the mountain. Waiting there for him were Master Godwind, Frigid Sect, and Crimson Soul. Three late nascent soul Taoist masters would be escorting him to the arcane pocket realm. Everyone watched silently as Bai Xiaochun made his way to the top of the mountain. Ghostfang emerged from his immortals cave, an absent-minded look in his eyes as he thought back to the time he had fought Bai Xiaochun back in the Spirit Stream sect. That was the first time he had ever lost to someone in the same generation as him, and although he hadn't appeared to have been affected in any way, it had awoken in him a strong desire to surpass Bai Xiaochun. At a certain point, though, he had come to realize that Bai Xiaochun's progress was almost unbelievable. He was already so far ahead that it almost seemed impossible to catch up. Then there was Song Ke, who stood atop one of the mountains in the Bloodstream division, hands clenched tightly into fists. He was thinking about the fallen Sword World, Heaven Dao Foundation establishment, and everything which had occurred after that. Within his eyes burned flames of defiance. I'm definitely going to surpass you one day. As for the Blood Masters and other top chosen in the Bloodstream division, all of them were equally unsettled. While they were concerned about their sect, they also couldn't help but compare themselves to Bai Xiaochun. The fact that none of them even qualified to go into the arcane pocket realm was profoundly chafing to all of them. Zhou Xinqi was having a hard time controlling her breathing, and Nine Isle's eyes were completely bloodshot. Master God Diviner and Jia Lai were both unsettled. In the past, there had been one dazzling chosen who was currently stuck at a cultivation base bottleneck. That was Lu Tinlei, who spent most of his time alone, refusing to go out. However, as of this moment, he chose to emerge from his immortal's cave and stare off at the figure ascending Mount River Defiance. Chen Manyao appeared, as did Gongsun Wan'er. Gongsun Wan'er's expression was the same as ever, her lips perpetually upturned into a faint smile. However, compared to all the people just mentioned, the person with the most complicated emotions of all was teetering on the verge of madness, Shangguan Tianyu. He stood tall and straight, his features as stunningly handsome as ever. He had no desire to even look at Bai Xiaochun, and therefore refused to emerge from his immortal's cave. Although he couldn't see Bai Xiaochun, his heart felt as if it had been bitten by the most poisonous of serpents, and the pain he felt was difficult to put into words. Eyes bloodshot and fists clenched, he said, "You're just a cheap bastard with no parents and no education. I'm Shangguan Tianyu. I'm definitely going to crush you beneath my feet." Although there were people who were jealous or angry, there were others who were sending Bai Xiaochun away with blessings and well wishes. Big Fatty Zhang, Hu Yunfei, Xu Baosai, Third Fatty He, and Li Qinghao were all present. Hu Xiaomei and Song Junwan were there too, wishing him well, but at the same time, very nervous. Countless eyes were fixed upon Bai Xiaochun as he ascended the mountain. Soon, he was at the very same altar where Bruiser had reached core formation. That was where the three patriarchs were waiting for him. As soon they looked over and saw his get-up, their jaws dropped, and they exchanged awkward glances. Finally, Frigid Sect coughed dryly and then waved his hand. Instantly, a silver beam of light descended from the sky above. It was the Heavenhorn sword, which began to grow larger and larger until it was fully 3,000 meters long. "All right, Xiaochun, it's time to leave," he said. With that, he blurred into motion, shooting toward the Heavenhorn sword. Crimson Soul and Master Godwin joined him, and within moments, they were on top of the sword, where they sat down cross-legged in a row. Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth and flew up to join them. Behind him, Bruiser threw his head back and roared as he followed along. Bruiser's eyes were filled with excitement and anticipation. This was his first time being allowed to go out with Bai Xiaochun for a trial by fire, and being alongside him for such an event was extremely exciting. "Let's go," Frigid Sect said, his voice booming like thunder. The Heavenhorn sword began to shine with dazzling silver light, and then rumbling echoed out as it shot off with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but rolling sonic booms and a long streak of silver light. Only after Bai Xiaochun left did people begin to speak again in the river-defying sect. Nine Isles, Song Ke, Ghost Fong, and the other chosen like them all went back into secluded meditation, their eyes filled with the determination to advance. All of them swore to reach core formation as quickly as possible. Even Big Fatty Zhang gritted his teeth and went into secluded meditation. Virtually everyone in the same generation as Bai Xiaochun did the same thing. The cultivation world of the Middle Reaches was so large that it couldn't really be described as being divided into continents. Instead, the word domain was used. As for the realm occupied by the river-defying sect, its name had recently been changed from the Sky Domain to the Defiance Domain. As for the Arcane Pocket Realm, it was located far away from the Defiance Domain in the Dao Domain, next to a seemingly endless desert. Because the desert was so far away from the Heavenspan River, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was rather faint there. It was in that region of scarce spiritual energy that the Arcane Pocket Realm existed, and despite its remoteness, it couldn't be judged as a place devoid of good fortune. There was a temple in that desert, a place of extreme ancientness that had existed longer than anyone could remember. This was the location where the legacy seals existed, and also the entrance to the Arcane Pocket Realm. Surrounding the temple were more than 100 stones sticking up out of the desert sands, each one well over 300 meters tall. The stones were very strange looking, and at first glance seemed to have been distributed randomly around the temple. However, closer examination would reveal that they had been placed in a specific pattern which altered the state of heaven and earth in the area. Shockingly, those stones were a powerful spell formation. Powerful fluctuations rolled out from the spell formation that even nascent soul cultivators would be leery of. Clearly, the only person who could have possibly put such a spell formation into place was a diva. The forces of the Starry River Court and the Polarity River Court could already be seen sitting cross-legged in meditation atop the stones. Each of the two sects had more than 20 cultivators who had yet to live for a full 60-year cycle. There were men and women, all of them with calm expressions. However, there was no hiding the aloof pride in their eyes, they were all top chosen in their sects. The truth was that they had a right to be proud. A mere glance at any one of them would reveal how different they were from ordinary cultivators. The two sects had spent vast amounts of resources to raise these chosen, who were seeds that would grow to be pillars of their respective organizations. One of them was Chen Yunshan. The two sects were seated apart from each other, and their auras were clearly different. As for the Starry River Court, their cultivators were surrounded by a murky radiance that almost seemed like countless stars, pulsing with a profound aura. In sharp contrast to them were the chosen of the Polarity River Court. They had fiendish, murderous auras, and gazes which seemed capable of penetrating into their opponents' hearts and minds. They seemed like people who killed at the drop of a hat, and were surrounded by a seething black mist. It was just barely possible to see the outlines of devilish spirits within that mist, roving to and fro. The energy on display here was something the likes of which no sect in the lower reaches cultivation world could ever have. Only the great sects of the middle reaches could put on a display like this. As the forces of the two sects sat there waiting, the cultivators began to look up into the sky as they sensed certain fluctuations off in the distance. A moment later, a streak of silver light appeared off in the distance, which was the Heavenhorn sword. As it pierced through the air, the power of a tenfold spirit enhancement rippled out in all directions. Clearly, the river-defying sect was trying to put on a good show. In the blink of an eye, the sword was closing in on the spell formation, allowing the cultivators of the Starry and Polarity River Courts to see the figures atop it. Ignoring the three patriarchs, their gazes came to rest on Bai Xiaochun. It was hard to say who among the two sects said it, but the surprise and derision in that person's voice couldn't have been more clear. Only one person? Everyone in the two sects began to snicker. Then, they simply looked away from the Heavenhorn sword, their hearts filled with disdain. Everyone knew that they were gathered to fight for a share of soon-to-be redistributed resources. Because of that, the number of people who participated was crucial. If the river-defying sect could only produce one person who qualified, then there was no suspense in the matter. The river-defying sect would be lucky to get 1% of the resources in the end. The Starry River Court cultivators were especially aware of why this redistribution of resources was happening. Not only were they very complacent, they simply couldn't hide their disdain for the river-defying sect. Chen Yunshan was the only one present whose eyes flickered with killing intent. He already hated Bai Xiaochun down to his guts. Not only had the events of the previous month plagued his nightmares afterwards, he had been punished by the sect, and had become a laughingstock among his contemporaries. Because of that, his rancor continued to fester day by day. Glaring at Bai Xiaochun, he thought, "It's too bad we're not allowed to kill anyone in here, otherwise you'd be dead." As for the people from the Polarity River Court, they weren't interested at all in the river-defying sect. To them, this was merely a mission to accomplish for the sect. Everyone here was to be rewarded, and they couldn't help but feel some disdain for the river-defying sect, who had only brought one person. Rumbling sounds filled the air as the Heavenhorn sword shot down from the sky. After coming to a stop some distance above the ground, the three patriarchs led Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser off of the sword and down to the ground. Bai Xiaochun was panting, and his eyes were wide as he took in the crowd of cultivators from the two sects. He almost couldn't believe that all of them were in the core formation stage. Each and every one was clearly an outstanding individual, and Bai Xiaochun's heart was already starting to fill with an intense sensation of danger because of it. How could there be so many of them? He thought, a miserable expression on his face. The mere idea of having to compete with more than 40 other top experts to get the legacy seals seemed almost too much for him to take. The three patriarchs were also frowning as they looked over the forces from the Starry and Polarity River courts. As for the nascent soul cultivators leading the two groups, they merely looked over and gave faint smiles. Clearly, they weren't interested in chatting. Compared to these two sects, the river-defying sect looked quite weak. So, Chen Yunshan said all of a sudden, "It turns out the river-defying sect doesn't just have one person. They have a beast, too. I guess that brings their total to 1.5. He started laughing, and was soon joined by others from his sect. Another cultivator called out, "I think it's a bit more than 1.5. Look at this guy. Just how many paper talismans does he have stuck on himself? And look at that huge black walk on his back." More laughter rose up as the Starry River Court cultivators began to mock Bai Xiaochun's outfit. As for the cultivators from the Polarity River Court, when they saw Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser, a few of them were unable to conceal the glitters of greed that rose up in their eyes. Clearly, they could see how amazing of a creature Bruiser was. Bruiser couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy having so many core formation cultivators staring at him. Almost instantly, the scales that covered his body began to stand on end, although the armor and paper talismans he was wearing made it impossible for anyone to see that. However, they could see the violet flames which sprang out beneath his feet, and the roar which echoed out from his mouth. Bai Xiaochun had been feeling a bit anxious, but Chen Yunshan's words, and the gazes which caused Bruiser to feel so anxious, stirred up his anger. And yet, anger did little. Compared to the two other sects, the river-defying sect really was too weak. The three patriarchs were already starting to regret having brought Bai Xiaochun to participate in this challenge. Earlier, they had assumed that his battle prowess and precious treasures would be enough to allow him to get at least a few of the legacy seals and come away unscathed, no matter how many of the other chosen wanted to harm him. Besides, the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had already laid down rules for how the fighting over the legacy seals would go. No one was allowed to kill any of the other chosen, an arrangement which was for the benefit of all four sects. After all, none of them wanted their chosen disciples to die in a place like this. Because of all that, the three patriarchs had felt comfortable bringing Bai Xiaochun here. Even if he didn't come away with much in terms of the legacy seals, at least he could get to know some of the other chosen in his generation, and get some precious fighting experience. But now that they realized he would be single-handedly facing dozens of opponents, the three patriarchs were starting to hesitate. In that moment, a booming like thunder filled the sky, and an enormous silver battleship appeared out of thin air. As the ship appeared, countless bolts of lightning crackled about in all directions, destroying the clouds around it as it descended. That battleship belonged to the strongest of the four Middle Reaches sects, the Dao River Court. In almost the exact same instant that the battleship appeared, numerous figures flew off of it and began to descend at top speed. It took only a moment to determine that there were more than 40 of them. There were men and women among the cultivators, and all of them seemed to radiate an air that transcended the mortal world, as well as shocking cultivation base fluctuations. All of them were cultivators who had stepped into core formation in less than a single 60-year cycle. Middle reaches sects controlled much larger territories than lower reaches sects, and also had access to much more resources. Furthermore, the energy of heaven and earth in the area was far stronger. Because of that, the sects here had many more chosen than lower reaches sects did. It almost wasn't even possible to compare the two regions. Along with the more than 40 core formation cultivators, an intense pressure began to weigh down as the same white-haired old man appeared who had made the final decision in the Grand Hall on Mount River Defiance a month ago. The old man looked over the collected cultivators, and didn't seem to be surprised at all that the river-defying sect only had Bai Xiaochun with them. Smiling faintly, he said, "I would like to welcome the emissary from the presiding sect to oversee our 4 sects competition for the legacy seals." Even as the words left his mouth, the clouds up above swirled together as if driven by a powerful wind, rapidly forming into the shape of an enormous eye. As the eye looked down, it radiated terrifying ripples that caused all light to dim. Instantly, the cultivators of the Starry River Court and the Polarity River Court rose to their feet, clasped hands and bowed. It was the same with the Tao River Court cultivators, as well as Frigid Sect, Master Godwind, Crimson Soul, and Bai Xiaochun. Next, a booming voice spoke. "The rules covering this competition for legacy seals are the same as always. Killing is not permitted. Anyone who intentionally ends the life of another will be destroyed in body and soul." Instantly, colorful light sprang up from the temple in the middle of the huge spell formation. The stones began to tremble, and the pressure weighing down began to fade away, making it possible for the cultivators to now enter the temple. "Let the competition begin," said the voice. Instantly, the 40 cultivators from the Tao River Court began to fly toward the temple. In the blink of an eye, the disciples from the Starry and Polarity River Courts followed. As for Bai Xiaochun, he gritted his teeth, and then took Bruiser along in the same direction. As he went along, he mentally reviewed everything he knew about the legacy seal competition. He knew that upon entering the temple itself, he would be teleported to a strange dimension. In the very middle of that dimension was a towering mountain surrounded by shocking spell formations that made it very difficult to approach the mountain itself. 100 legacy seals were located inside of the mountain, and would fly out in succession to the surrounding area, where the cultivators could fight over them. Whoever acquired and absorbed the most would get some type of technique. Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser followed the group through the stone spell formation. Considering that Bai Xiaochun was cautious by nature, he didn't hurry, and by the time he reached the temple itself, the other disciples from the 3 sects had already entered. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked over at Bruiser. "Bruiser, remember to stick close to me. There are going to be a lot of bad people in there." Bruiser gave a soft howl and nodded his head. Bai Xiaochun took a moment to straighten his garments, his paper talismans, and the big black walk. Then he gritted his teeth and stepped into the temple. The moment Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser entered the temple, the light around them faded away, and jarring rumbling sounds could be heard. Outside the temple, intense pressure once again weighed down, making it impossible for anyone to approach the temple. At the same time, a light screen was projected into the air above the temple, cast by the stone spell formation. Clearly visible on the light screen were the names of all 4 sects, next to which were glowing circles, faint and barely visible. The 3 patriarchs from the river-defying sect all exchanged glances. Those glowing circles represented the number of legacy seals acquired by the various disciples in the legacy zone. As the circles glowed more and more brightly, they would create columns of light which would make it instantly obvious how many legacy seals each sect had acquired. Outside of the stone spell formation were the nascent soul cultivators of the various sects, who numbered in the dozens or so. At the moment, the red-haired old man from the Starry River Court looked courteously toward the nascent soul experts from the Polarity River Court and the Tao River Court. "The Tao River Court will definitely take first again," he said with a slight smile. "As for second place, well, Brother Yang, I know that the Starry River Court can't compete with the Polarity River Court. Therefore, we haven't set our goals too high. Third place will do." The red-haired old man chuckled. The cultivator whom the red-haired old man had referred to as Brother Yang was a middle-aged man wearing the robes of the Polarity River Court. Smiling, he said, "Brother Joe, you're overthinking things. Let's just wait and see who takes second and third place." Despite his words, his expression was one of utmost confidence. As the cultivators of the 3 sects chatted, they completely ignored the river-defying sect. Master Godwind, Frigid Sect, and Crimson Soul all had unsightly expressions on their faces as they sat there silently. In this legacy zone, heaven and earth were currently cloaked in darkness. The sky was leaden, a perfect complement to the pitch-black lands that stretched out below it. However, serving as a perfect foil to the darkness were the brilliant beams of light that were breaking out in multiple locations within the dimension. Those beams of light all contained cultivators, and the brilliance they cast instantly illuminated the murky world around them. Because of the new light, it was now possible to see that the dimension wasn't very large. Furthermore, in the exact center of it, there was a mountain with a peak so tall it pierced the clouds. It was so immense that anyone looking up at it would feel like a tiny insect. The surface of the mountain was covered with numerous sealing marks, which moments ago had been the same color as the surface of the mountain itself. However, the arrival of the cultivators caused them to glow with bright light. Close examination revealed that the sealing marks on the mountain were limited in number. There were exactly 100 of them. This towering peak was none other than the Mountain of Legacy Seals. It was also the brightest location in the entire Legacy Zone. As the crowd of cultivators appeared, Bai Xiaochun became visible within one of the beams of light. Next to him was Bruiser. As soon as they both appeared, Bai Xiaochun activated his paper talismans, causing dazzling, colorful lights to appear all around him. It actually looked quite attractive. He was like an entity of colorful light. Next, he helped Bruiser activate all of his paper talismans until he looked equally as colorful. Because of that, they became very conspicuous within the Legacy dimension. Quite a few gazes shifted in their direction, gazes of derision and mockery. Bai Xiaochun had already been nervous to begin with, and when he realized people were staring at him, he gasped, and his heart filled with icy fear. This place is so dangerous. So much killing intent. Bai Xiaochun put a restraining hand on Bruiser's back, and then looked around vigilantly. After confirming that people were looking at him but not heading in his direction, he breathed a sigh of relief. Then he began to glare back at people. I've never lost to anybody when it comes to contests like this. Am I right, Bruiser? Alright, come on, let's both glare at them. Show them how badass the two of us are. From that point on, whenever anyone looked over at him, Bai Xiaochun would glare back with a murderous stare, as did Bruiser. One particular young man from the Starry River Court who was relatively close to the two of them smiled mockingly and said, Junior Patriarch of the River-defying sect? Did you bring all of the paper talismans from your entire sect with you? Do you have enough? Or should I give you a few of mine? Bai Xiaochun turned and cast him a fierce glare. Sure, hand a few over. The young man's scorn increased. Laughing coldly, he ignored Bai Xiaochun and began to head in the direction of the Mountain of Legacy Seals. He wasn't the only one. The disciples of the three sects all began to transform into beams of light that headed in the same direction. Because of how close the mountain was, none of them flew, but instead, sped along on foot. Bai Xiaochun chose not to act blindly and without thinking. Instead, he took some time to assess the situation. The disciples approaching the Mountain of Legacy Seals were all going along on foot. Not a single one was flying. Furthermore, all of them stopped at a certain point roughly 15,000 meters from the base of the mountain. Furthermore, the disciples didn't simply scatter. Instead, looks of vigilance could be seen on their faces as they began to gather in ranks according to their sects. Suddenly, rumbling sounds filled the air as numerous lightning bolts appeared in the area between the cultivators and the mountains, as well as a gale-force wind. The lightning bolts were as thick as buckets, and the intense wind was pitch black and contained incredible power. In fact, the wind almost looked like black dragons sweeping back and forth within the 15,000-meter region. Anyone with eyes could see how incredibly powerful the lightning bolts and the blasts of wind were. Other types of magic began to spread out. There were gigantic hands, blades of ice, and tongues of fire. There were illusory projections that looked like shrieking ghosts. Thorns began to grow up out of the ground, and deep crevices opened up randomly here and there. Obviously, the 15,000-meter area was a place rife with danger. Even nascent soul Taoist masters would be leery of such an area, let alone core formation cultivators. Bai Xiaochun looked over and noticed one of the cultivators from the Polarity River Court summon a puppet, which he sent into the 15,000-meter region. Before it got far, a bolt of lightning struck it, reducing it to nothing more than ashes. Bai Xiaochun gasped, and his face drained of blood. The Jade Slip said this Mountain of Legacy Seals was dangerous, but it didn't say it was this dangerous. That puppet was at the same level as core formation, and it got destroyed by a single lightning bolt. Bai Xiaochun stood in place hesitantly, trembling the entire time. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only one to react with such shock. Several disciples of the three sects used various magical means to try to enter the 15,000-meter area on their own, but in the end, were left sighing in frustration. It must be because this isn't the usual time to enter the legacy zone. The defensive spells around the mountain of legacy seals must be much more powerful than usual. Usually the Starry Sky Dao Polarity Sect's emissary limits the power, but not this time. After discussing the matter, the three groups tightened their formations and then began to slowly make their way into the 15,000-meter area in groups. Whenever dangerous situations arose, they would pool their power to defend themselves. Before long, booms filled the air, and the lands began to quake. Bai Xiaochun stood there in hesitation for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. At that point, one of the 100 sealing marks on the mountain of legacy seals suddenly began to shine brightly, then flew up into the air and spiraled out into the 15,000-meter region. Almost instantly, all of the disciples of the three sects looked over nervously at the sealing mark as it circled out further and further away from the mountain. When it reached the 13,500-meter mark, the disciples started making attempts to acquire it. The cultivators from the Starry River Court unleashed all of their cultivation base power, creating a stream of brilliant starlight fully 3,000 meters long. It only took a moment for the stream of starlight to bear down on the sealing mark as if to wrap it up and drag it away. At that point, the people from the Polarity River Court let out a bellow as they erupted with devil chi, summoning a huge flying head that shot toward the sealing mark and began to contend with the Starry River Court. The Dao River Court had the most people in the legacy zone. When they looked over at what was happening, many of them took deep breaths and then began to emanate a strange power that seemed almost like natural law. Instantly, the air surrounding their group began to twist and distort. Then, rumbling could be heard as a towering giant took form. Without any hesitation, the giant strode forward and reached out to grab the legacy seal. As soon as the giant's hand closed around the sealing mark, it vanished and reappeared in the hand of one of the Dao River Court cultivators. "It's mine," he cried excitedly, throwing his head back and laughing as he absorbed the mark into his body. The other Dao River Court disciples were a bit jealous, and the Starry and Polarity River Courts were disappointed, but didn't let it show on their faces. In fact, some of them even smiled in congratulation. Bai Xiaochun was left gasping at the scene which had just played out. He also understood the rules in this place a bit better now. Once the sealing marks flew out from the mountain of legacy seals, the people who were closer to the mountain would have an advantage in trying to acquire them. One should be enough for me, he thought, gritting his teeth. He didn't set his expectations too high. As long as he could get one, then at least he could call the mission a success. Trying to get more than that would surely be too dangerous. With that, he headed toward the mountain. By the time he reached the border and prepared to step in, the cultivators of the three sects were already about 200 or 300 meters in. Almost as soon as he entered, a black blast of wind shot toward him, filling his head with a sense of explosive crisis. Letting out a shriek, he backed up. Then a lightning bolt shot toward him, and he fell back again, scowling on the verge of tears. Within moments, he was back outside the 15,000-meter area. Only then did the various defensive magics ignore him. What do I do now? He thought. Not daring to enter the area again, he looked over at Bruiser, who stared back at him blankly. This won't work, Bai Xiaochun thought sullenly. He considered approaching the mountain of legacy seals from a different direction, but after a quick survey, was convinced that the other areas were actually more dangerous than this one. Viewed with the naked eye, all areas surrounding the mountain of legacy seals were possible avenues of approach. However, with his heaven-span Dharma eye, Bai Xiaochun could tell that the general area where he and the members of the other three sects were was the only viable option for success. Other areas were vastly more dangerous, and in fact, the three sects were all staying in roughly the same area, relatively close to each other. Only by pooling their strength were they gradually making progress. The Dao River Court was strongest, and they were already about 1,500 meters in. On either side of them, and a bit further back were the Polarity River Court and the Starry River Court, the former being over 1,200 meters in, and the latter roughly 900 meters. Bai Xiaochun was the only person standing alone on the outside. Since I'm on my own, there's no way I can stay inside for long. I'm only going to have a couple chances. Eyes bloodshot, he produced some more paper talismans and slapped them down on himself and Bruiser. He also pulled out some defensive magical items. Finally, he turned and whispered to Bruiser, in a bit, when the right opportunity comes along, I'm going to make my move and try to grab one of the legacy seals. If anything goes wrong, you save me. Bruiser immediately nodded. He could see how dangerous the 15,000-meter area was, and although he was very happy to finally be outside on a mission with Bai Xiaochun, he was also very nervous. Bai Xiaochun stood there staring at the mountain of legacy seals, waiting for his next opportunity. After about 10 breaths of time passed, another of the sealing marks suddenly began to glow brightly, then flew out into the air. It flew a few circles in the 9,000-meter region, then went further out, whereupon the forces of the three sects prepared to begin fighting over it. However, the sealing mark moved too quickly, and flitted through the grasping hands of the cultivators of the three sects. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and then he howled at the top of his lungs as he activated all of his paper talismans, unleashing the explosive power of his undying heavenly king body, and used the mountain-shaking bash. Worried that all that might not give him enough speed, he pushed off using the big toe of his left foot. In the blink of an eye, he was nothing but a series of afterimages that shot into the danger zone. He was moving so fast that he was little more than a blur as he arrived in front of the sealing mark, and then reached out to grab it. However, in almost the exact same instant, the people from the Starry River Court shouted in rage and pooled their power to block his path. Rumbling sounds echoed out as he was shoved backward, and the Starry River Court's stream of stars snatched the sealing mark away. Bai Xiaochun didn't want to accept it, but was out of options, and had to flee back to safety. Along the way, he was struck by a bolt of lightning, which destroyed most of his activated paper talismans. "You big bullies," he fumed, glaring back. However, before his anger had much of a chance to flare up, two sealing marks suddenly flickered and flew into the air off of the mountain of legacy seals. The Polarity River Court went all out in their attempt to grab the first, but the second managed to slip past the three sects. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened, and then he burst into motion to make another attempt. More lightning crashed around him, and he had to dodge seas of flames. All of his paper talismans were destroyed, and even his black walk was shattered. However, all of that brought him right up to the sealing mark. "Beat it." A cold snort ripped through the air, sending crushing pressure into Bai Xiaochun's mind. At the same time, rumbling sounds filled the air as the Dao River Court's illusory giant stormed toward him. The giant waved its hand, unleashing a terrifying burst of power, a magical technique that was no weaker than the magics of the world itself. Before Bai Xiaochun could do anything, the giant was upon him. At that point, he drew upon all of his fleshly body power, as well as his Heaven Dao Gold core, to fight back. He continued to reach out his hand toward the sealing mark, which was now only 9 meters away. However, that was when the giant's fist struck out, sending a violent tempest of wind into Bai Xiaochun that carried him away, head over heels. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth as another set of paper talismans was completely destroyed, along with quite a few of his defensive magical items. At the same time, the force of the blow left him temporarily immobilized. After all, the giant was backed by the power of a whole group of people, whereas Bai Xiaochun was acting alone. After grinding to a halt, he looked up as the giant casually grabbed the sealing mark which he had been just on the verge of taking. At the same time, numerous magics were unleashed by the world around him. The giant looked over its shoulder at him, its expression that of scorn. "You think a bit too much of yourself." Then it shot back toward the group from the Dao River Court. In the moment of crisis in which the magical techniques bore down on Bai Xiaochun, Bruiser let out an angry roar, grabbed Bai Xiaochun's robe, and started dragging him backward. However, that was when the stream of stars from the Starry River Court appeared and blocked their path, making it impossible for them to escape. The lightning slammed into Bruiser, causing blood to spray out of his mouth. Thankfully, Bai Xiaochun had recovered by that point, so he grabbed Bruiser and rushed back out toward the safe area. The people from the Polarity River Court watched Bai Xiaochun and Bruiser flee with contempt. A cold snort rang out and someone said, "The river-defying sect isn't strong enough to get even one sealing mark. Be a good boy and stay outside. Don't look for trouble in here." The Starry River Court people were equally derisive. Chen Yunshan even said, "If you try to mess with us, we might not be able to kill you because of the rules, but the defensive spells here could destroy you." Nobody would care if that happened. The evil intentions hidden within those words couldn't have been more clear. Even as Bai Xiaochun continued to retreat, a black wind hit him from behind, causing blood to spray from his mouth. When he finally made it to safety, he looked back to see that the cultivators from the other sects were all about 1,500 meters into the zone of defensive spells. Complete and utter bullies, he thought, anger burning. Then he looked down and saw how hurt Bruiser was, and his rage simmered even hotter. Glaring over at the cultivators of the three sects, he growled, "I don't care if you snatch the sealing marks away from me, or even if you hurt me. But you hurt Bruiser. You people are forcing my hand." Eyes more bloodshot than ever, he gritted his teeth and gave Bruiser some medicinal pills. Looking back at the situation, he saw that the Dao River Court was now about 3,000 meters in. With that, he blurred into motion, taking Bruiser toward one of the areas he had observed earlier with this heaven-span Dharma eye, a place that seemed impossible to pass through. Meanwhile, outside of the Legacy Zone, at the border of the stone spell formation, the nascent soul cultivators from the 4 sects were looking at the glowing screen, and the 4 circles of light which represented the achievements of the disciples. The Tao River Quartz circle was the brightest, with the Starry and Polarity River Quartz also lit up, but not as bright. Only the River-defying sect's circle had remained dark the entire time. The level of brightness indicated how many sealing marks had been obtained, and therefore, the nascent soul cultivators from the Tao River Court were all smiles. Of course, none of this was unexpected. As far as they were concerned, the Tao River Court should be the one to take first place. The red-haired old man from the Starry River Court laughed heartily and said, "Congratulations, fellow Taoists. It seems the Tao River Court really will take first place again. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem the fellow Taoists from the river-defying sect are doing very well. Definitely not as well as the Sky River Court did last time. They took second place back then, and almost tied with the Tao River Court." The faces of Crimson Soul, Frigid Sect, and Master Godwind were all very grim. Eventually, they had no choice but to sigh. They had been prepared for defeat from the beginning, but had still hoped that Bai Xiaochun would be able to get at least one sealing mark. "Fellow Taoist Frigid Sect," the red-haired cultivator said, "what do you say we make a little bet? I'm guessing your river-defying sect won't be able to get more than 2 sealing marks." Frigid Sect's expression darkened even further, and it was the same with the other 2 patriarchs. As for the Tao River Court and the Polarity River Court, they looked very amused at what was happening. Suddenly, Master Godwind looked over at the red-haired old man and slowly said, "A bet? What are the stakes?" The red-haired old man smiled coldly and said, "I happen to have a starry meteor from the Starry River Court, which can unleash an attack with power similar to the Diva realm. I'll put that up against one of your river-defying sect's heaven-span battleships." Frigid Sect's expression flickered, and Master Godwin's eyes glinted with incisive light. Starry meteors were in fact spirit treasures from the Starry River Court, and were of similar value to heaven-span battleships. However, the heaven-span battleships were much more precious to the river-defying sect than starry meteors were to the Starry River Court. Clearly, this red-haired old man had planned this all along. "We're only talking about 2 sealing marks," he said in a cold voice. "Is the river-defying sect really not even confident in getting 2 little sealing marks?" The red-haired old man narrowed his eyes. Master Godwind maintained his silence, as did Patriarch Crimson Soul. The 2 of them looked over at Frigid Sect. If the river-defying sect won a bet like this, it would be a big gain for their sect. Getting a starry meteor would make up for some of the losses that were going to occur within the legacy competition. However, if they lost, and had to hand over a heaven-span battleship, the overall battle prowess of the river-defying sect would be significantly reduced. In the end, the heaven-span battleship at stake belonged to the Spirit Stream Division, and furthermore, Frigid Sect knew Bai Xiaochun better than the other 2. Therefore, he was the one who would make the final decision. Frigid Sect looked up at the dark circle which represented the river-defying sect, and took a moment to think back to all the miraculous things Bai Xiaochun had accomplished. If they won the bet, it would be a big boost in confidence and morale for the sect. If they lost, well, even refusing to take the bet would mean that they had lost to the other 3 sects. The stakes were high, but the truth was that the river-defying sect didn't actually have much to lose. "You're on," Frigid Sect said through gritted teeth. In response, the red-haired old man laughed heartily. The truth was that earlier, he had already given orders to the disciples who had gone into the Legacy Zone. Not only was their mission to get as many legacy seals as possible, they were also to stop the river-defying sect from getting even a single one. Considering that, he thought, it's theoretically possible he could get a single seal by accident. But he definitely won't be able to get 2. Inwardly, he was chuckling coldly. What made him even more confident was that he knew that because it was not the usual appointed time for the trial by fire, the defensive spell zone outside the Mountain of Legacy Seals would be more difficult to pass through. Therefore, it would be virtually impossible for Bai Xiaochun to get close to the mountain on his own. The Tao and Polarity River Courts were paying close attention to what was happening. It was obvious to them what the Starry River Court was trying to do. Not only were they trying to secure the resources which had once belonged to the Sky River Court, they were trying to weaken the river-defying sect. In the future, it was easy to imagine how they, in their greed, would begin to swallow up the river-defying sect to strengthen themselves. After all, the Starry River Court bordered the river-defying sect. In the past, the Sky River Court had completely dominated the Starry River Court, and on many situations, the Starry River Court had been forced to wait to see what the Sky River Court did before they themselves took action. But now, the Sky River Court was no more, and the Starry River Court had a new neighbor. As the matter with the bet played out on the outside, the Dao River Court forces inside the Legacy Zone reached the 3,600-meter mark. Apparently, that was their limit. Not even their powerful giant could progress much further without being destroyed. The Polarity River Court was about 2,700 meters in, not quite as far as the Dao River Court. However, the Dao River Court wouldn't be capable of snatching every single one of the legacy seals, ensuring that the Polarity River Court would still be able to get a good share. The Starry River Court was the weakest of all, and was only about 1,500 meters in. Despite being behind the Polarity and Dao River Courts, they would still be able to get some of the seals, and simultaneously deprive the river-defying sect of any. By this point, about 10 sealing marks had flown out from the mountain of legacy seals. Bai Xiaochun had led Bruiser to a point some distance away from the three sects, although they were still within eyeshot. With his heaven-span Dharma eye, he had located the perfect spot. The pressure weighing down in the area was vastly greater than the safe spot where the three sects had entered. "Bruiser, I need you to shrink down," he said, his voice cold. "Dad's gonna take you to have some fun." Bruiser looked surprised, but a moment later, he shivered and began to shrink down in size. Soon, he was small enough that Bai Xiaochun was able to place him in the folds of his robe. Then, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath, causing a tremor to run through him. Cracking sounds rang out as he used the power of the Undying Live Forever technique and his Heaven Dao Gold core to shrink down. Bones and flesh alike became smaller, until Bai Xiaochun was the size of a small child. His clothing was too large, so he simply ripped it off. Then he waved his finger toward the ground, and a flash of black light could be seen as the turtle walk appeared. "You people are forcing my hand," he said through gritted teeth. "I didn't want to cheat." Bai Xiaochun didn't like using the walk publicly, but right now, he was out of options. Taking a deep breath, he lay down on the ground and dragged the turtle walk over him. Now that he had shrunk down, it was easy for him to fit underneath it, making it look very much like an actual turtle as it lay there on the ground. Almost in the same moment, a delighted exclamation could be heard from within his bag of holding. "Ha ha ha, you definitely deserve to be my pet. Good job, little Bai. Master approves." It was none other than the little turtle, who flew out with a pop and landed on the ground just behind Bai Xiaochun. "You shut up," Bai Xiaochun yelled. Ignoring the little turtle, he tilted the edge of the turtle walk up and looked at the 15,000 meters of dangerous territory up ahead, then began to crawl forward. The little turtle followed along, laughing. From a distance, it looked like two turtles, one big and one small, crawling slowly into the zone of restrictive spells. Almost as soon as they entered, a bolt of lightning many times bigger than any of the previous bolts fell from above and slammed into the turtle walk. However, the walk was virtually indestructible, and no amount of lightning could do anything to it. Bai Xiaochun felt some vibrations, but that was it. With the added protection of the walk, his Undying Live Forever technique and Heaven Dao Gold core ensured that he was completely unharmed. Off in the distance, the cultivators of the three sects were currently fighting over one of the legacy seals when they suddenly sensed that something strange was going on with Bai Xiaochun. The cultivators began to look over, and soon noticed the two turtles. "What's that? It's a turtle shell. I can't believe that guy from the river-defying sect is using this method to get into the defensive spell zone. Ha ha ha. Bai Xiaochun actually found a turtle shell somewhere and is using it for protection? Wait, it's not just one turtle. Look, there's an even smaller turtle behind the first one. Hilarious." Roars of laughter could soon be heard from the three sects. Even the group from the Dao River Court couldn't contain their scorn. The people from the Starry River Court were laughing the loudest, especially Chen Yunshan. "Bai Xiaochun," he yelled through his laughter, "aren't you the junior patriarch of the river-defying sect? I can't believe you're willing to become a turtle just to get some legacy seals. Come, just kowtow to me a few times and I'll give you a few for free. What do you say?" Bai Xiaochun could hear the mocking of the three sects, and couldn't help but let out an angry harumph. "You just wait and see what happens," he thought. As he crawled forward, black winds screamed, and seas of flame battered him. Blades of ice shot toward him, along with countless other magics. However, none of them could stop him. With the turtle walk on his back, he crawled relentlessly forward until he was 300 meters in. The mocking cries coming from the three sects began to die down. In fact, many people's eyes began to widen, and gasps could be heard. "What kind of turtle shell is that? How is this even possible? The area Bai Xiaochun is in is far, far more dangerous than where we are. The lightning, the fire, the wind, none of it has any effect on that turtle shell. Whoa, look, he's picking up speed. Jaws dropped as the turtle shell, apparently having become used to the area, began to go faster and faster. 600 meters, 900 meters, 1,200 meters. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the magic slammed into the turtle shell, and yet nothing could stop it from accelerating. Before long, it had passed the 1,500-meter mark. Impossible, Chen Yunshan howled. He simply couldn't believe what he was seeing, and was panting as a result. He wasn't the only one to react in such a way. Everyone from the Polarity River Court had similar looks of disbelief on their faces. By this point, more than 100 bolts of lightning had struck the turtle shell, and yet, it only continued to move faster and faster. Of course, despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun was hidden under the turtle shell, all of them knew exactly what kind of expression was on his face. One of utmost pride. HMMMPH. When Lord Bai takes action, he frightens even himself. I can't believe you people dared to bully me. Feeling very pleased with himself, he continued to crawl along on his hands and knees. Soon, he was 1,800 meters in. Then 2,100 meters. Then 3,000 meters. Not even the cultivators from the Dao River Court dared to lightly enter such a region, but Bai Xiaochun didn't seem worried at all. In fact, soon the cultivators of the three sects could hear Bai Xiaochun humming a little tune. Not a single one of the dangerous magics in the area had even the slightest effect on the turtle shell. This. Everyone was completely and utterly stunned. Important info. In the note attached to this chapter during its initial release, General complained about some pain he was feeling while sitting and typing. Over the course of the following several chapters, he included more and more such notes. He tried various folk remedies but nothing helped, and the pain started to reach excruciating levels. He eventually went to the hospital and found that he had some sort of hemorrhoid or other such condition, and needed surgery to fix the problem. He eventually did have surgery, after which he had to write chapters while laying on his stomach. The recovery process lasted for a while before he was able to get back to normal. Throughout that time, he mostly kept to his release schedule, but missed a few days here and there and slowed down once or twice. He also chronicled the situation in his post-chapter notes. Instead of translating all of those notes, I'm including this short explanation. It wasn't until well past 390 that he had recovered from the surgery to the point where he could resume writing as usual. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.